Welcome everybody to the Cardboard Crash Course. My name's Ethan, and today we're talking about the Barony of Letnev, a faction from Twilight Imperium 4th edition, upgraded by the Prophecy of Kings expansion right behind me. If you haven't learned how to play the game, hit that button in the top right corner, and learn how to play before jumping back to this playlist. Without further ado, let's head on out and learn about the Barony. Here we have the Barony of Letnev's faction sheet. The Letnev have always been an incredibly proud race, living underneath the surface of their home planet of Arc Prime. Alongside Arc Prime, Ren Terra, its sister planet, have both been very high in resources, including massive deposits of ore and gemstones to build fleets of starships. Unfortunately for the Letnev, however, the Lazak's Imperium for millennia blockaded its income of natural resources such as food, water, and general living expenses. This was out of fear that the Letnev might become too powerful and overtake them one day, because if they had everything they needed, they may be the most powerful race in the galaxy. After two unsuccessful rebellions against the Lazaks, the Letnev finally decided to blockade the Quan wormhole, the leading trade route between most races of the galaxy. Because of this blockade, the Sol Federation fired upon the Letnev and declared war, spiraling the galaxy into the Twilight Wars. Now that the Twilight Wars have almost come to an end, the Letnev are finally deciding that they are powerful and have everything they need to retake the galaxy against what they believe was an unjust Imperium. So, beginning on Arc Prime and Ren Terra, this is a 4-resource and 0-influence planet, as well as a 2-resource and 1-influence planet. 6 resources is not bad to start with, but that low influence value is something we're going to have to fix, and I'll talk about that in the analysis. They also begin on those planets with 1 dreadnought, 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 1 fighter, 3 infantry, and a space dock. As you can already tell, the Barony of Letnev is not too much about the small chaff of their fleet. They like huge, massive starships. This isn't too bad of a start, especially considering the Dreadnought has a capacity, but you'll have to be really smart about how you use it. They have 2 starting technologies as well, in anti-mass deflectors and plasma scoring. Anti-mass deflectors is a 0 prerequisite blue technology that says your ships can move into and through asteroid fields. Also, when other players' units use space cannon against your units, apply -1 to the result of each die roll. So this is a little bit of help when you actually go in to invade somebody, and we'll see some more help in just a minute. We also have plasma scoring, a 0 prerequisite red technology that says, when one or more of your units use bombardment or space cannon, one of those units may roll 1 additional die. So this is both an aggressive and a defensive ability. As you'll see, this faction loves to fight on the board. They have 2 commodities to give out, which is especially low, tied for the Sardak Nor, which gives you a little bit of idea into their lore. And they also have 2 abilities, Munitions Reserve and Armada. Munitions Reserve says, at the start of each round of space combat, you may spend 2 trade goods. You may re-roll any number of your dice during that combat round. Keep in mind 2 things. This is at the beginning of each round, not just at the beginning of space combat, so you can do this multiple times. And also, you can only re-roll once. You can't just re-roll until you get what you need. Armada, on the other hand, says, the maximum number of non-fighter ships you can have in each system is equal to 2 more than the number of tokens in your fleet pool. So this is a very different type of ability. This is inherent to the faction and cannot be taken away. Their fleets are always statically bigger than everybody else's, and gives you a little bit of hint into fixing their command counter problem. Before we move on to the flagship, I'd like to talk about their 2 technologies that they can get throughout the game. We have non-Euclidean shielding to start. This is a very important ability. It requires 2 red technology prerequisites. When one of your units uses sustained damage, cancel 2 hits instead of 1. That's a fun, powerful, fighty ability. Moving on, we also have L4 disruptors. This is a single yellow prerequisite technology and says during an invasion, units cannot use space cannon against your units. So remember when I said we're going to get an upgrade to that anti-mass deflectors? L4 disruptors is that. It's not a static minus, it's just turning it completely off. As you can see so far, the Barony of Letnev like to go in and fight for what they want. This is also shown on the Arc Secundus, their flagship. This is a very good flagship that costs 8, has a 5x2 combat value, 1 movement, and 3 capacity, with sustained damage. It also has bombardment 5x3, and says other players' units in this system lose planetary shield. At the start of each space combat round, repair this ship. So if you've got somebody who's losing space cannon and losing planetary shield, as well as repairing this ship every single round, you're going to have an incredibly scary fleet. We also have Dunlane Reaper. This is their mech, introduced in Prophecy of Kings. It costs 2, has 6 combat value, and sustained damage like most mechs, but can actually be deployed for something else than just spending the 2 cost. At the start of a round of ground combat, you may spend 2 resources to replace one of your infantry in that combat with 1 mech. So it still costs 2, but you can do it at the very last moment, exactly where you need. I love that ability. Moving on then to their leader suite, starting with their agent. This begins the game unlocked and is Viscount Unlen. It says at the start of a space combat round, you may exhaust this card to choose 1 ship in the active system. That ship rolls 1 additional die during this combat round. So again, when you exhaust this, it's going to be in the middle of a fight, or actually rather at the start, but it's going to give you a nice little boost. Next up we have their commander, Rear Admiral Farron. This begins the game locked and unlocks when you have 5 non-fighter ships in one system. When you do have that massive fleet, you get the passive ability. After one of your units uses sustained damage, you may gain 1 trade good. This is included in the use of non-Euclidean shielding, so you're constantly just getting that money back when you use your passive ability. And finally, we have their hero, Dark Talon Triella. It unlocks when you have 3 scored objectives, like any hero, and gives you the ultimate ability, Dark Matter Affinity. As an action, place this card near the game board. The number of non-fighter ships you can have in systems is not limited by laws or by the number of command tokens in your fleet pool during this game round. At the end of that game round, purge this card. If I'm completely honest, this is a very, very situational ability. This is not going to come up every game, and don't expect to have to use it. But when you do have to use it, it could win you the whole game. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Their very final card is War Funding. This is their promissory note that they're going to give out to other people, and was actually upgraded by the Codex. So this is War Funding Omega. If you want to know how to print out the Codex, especially in a nice quality like this, go into the description below. They gain the ability, after you and your opponent roll dice during space combat, you may reroll all of your opponent's dice, and then you may reroll any number of your dice. Then return this card to the Letnev player. I like this card a lot, and definitely gives you a lot of choices that you'll use during combat. It's like the Letnev is helping from behind. So that's their card suite they're going to use throughout the game. Let's talk about how this is going to fit into one big puzzle, and head on out. Alright everybody, so before we talk about the Barony of Letnev, I'd like to remind you of 2 things really quick. One is that this is the second to last faction guide. I'm going to do something special for the Emirates of Hakan, which is up next, the very last faction guide. So stay subscribed, put on notifications, and be ready for when that video comes out, because I've got something planned. Also check out the Cardboard Crash Course podcast, which I'm going to put in the description below. If you have any interest in checking out something that you can just listen to in the car instead of all of this interaction going on. And we also have a couple of episodes about Twilight Imperium so far, as well as a 5th episode coming out soon. So if you're a board game fan, Twilight Imperium fan, check that out and give it a look. So Barony of Letnev is a faction that's been around since the 1st edition of Twilight Imperium and have not really changed much. They've always been the big ship, big fleet, punchy, fighty faction. Nowadays, we have a couple more factions that are better at actually fighting than they are and get more of a benefit out of it, especially Necrovirus and Volwraith Cabal. The Necrovirus, of course, get technologies out of it, and the Volwraith Cabal just simply get bigger and bigger fleets the more they fight. So, is the Barony of Letnev a fighting faction? That's really what we're going to talk about here. And I want to get it stuck in your head. The Barony of Letnev does not have to fight to get what they want, but the threat of their abilities is just as important as the actual abilities themselves. You don't actually want to be losing anything in battle because The only thing you get is a trade good here, trade good there for using your sustained damage ability. Unlike those two that I just mentioned, you don't actually necessarily get anything new out of fighting somebody. So in these videos, I like to talk about three things mainly. One is faction tree, one is strategy cards they like, and then we talk about the general overview of the faction. Starting off with the tech tree, you're going to definitely want to get non-Euclidean shielding. This is a 2 red technology prerequisite there and allows you to really hammer down that sustained damage, which is upgraded by your commander. So non-Euclidean shielding requires 2 red prerequisites, and you get one of those from the plasma scoring that you begin with. In this way, you have 3 options: AI development algorithm, mage and defense grid, and self-assembly routines. So it's really between the 3 of these as to where to go for non-Euclidean shielding. I don't personally think that mage and defense grid is all that great because ground combat is kind of an afterthought for the Barony of Letnev, because they're much better at things such as bombardment and getting rid of things before actually hitting the ground. And for a different reason, self-assembly routines isn't that helpful for them either, because they actually have a deploy ability in their mech, being able to get their mechs out in the fight just like self-assembly routines would anyway. So actually, I believe that AI development algorithm is a fantastic way to go about getting there. AI development algorithm reads as follows. When you research a unit upgrade tech, you may exhaust this card to ignore any one prerequisite. So you get those actual ships faster and better. And then, when one or more of your units use production later on, you may exhaust this card to reduce the combined cost of those produced units by the number of unit upgrade techs that you own. So this is a great way to skip to the exact fleet size and fleet type that you need for what you're doing. If you're going towards the Nalu, you may want to push towards more of a destroyer strategy or the such. If you're going towards the Mentech, you could go for more of an assault cannon type thing with large ships, and so on and so forth. But this allows for really what the Barony of Letnev is missing throughout their strategy, and that is options. Self-assembly routines allows them flexibility to change their strategy at a moment's notice throughout the game, as long as they have a command counter to use on technology or the technology secondary. So now that you've got non-Euclidean shielding, you could move into assault cannon. Assault cannon is great because it kind of halfway wins fights before the fights start. But it's a weird interaction with the Barony of Letnev because you have to be careful. Yes, they are a perfect faction to actually use it because they have large fleet sizes, so they'll never have an issue really with getting it to go off. But at the same time, you need to make sure that you're utilizing the commander as much as you possibly can to get those trade goods within the fight. Those trade goods can not only be helpful towards the actual objectives themselves, but you can use them towards your deployability on your mech after you've won the space battle and going down to ground. They're not like the Hakan where it's a pay-to-win literal strategy, but they do get some benefits off of having those trade goods in the fight. So in essence, winning too soon might actually be a detriment for them. But winning is winning, so keep that in mind. What do you need at this very moment? Duranium armor is fantastic with them, keep this in mind. During each combat round, after you assign hits to your units, repair one of the damaged units that did not use sustained damage during this combat round. You can super sustain with getting 2 at once, and then go back to normal just inherently. That does kind of overlap with Arc Secundus with the flagship, but it is still fantastic. So now that you've got your red tech figured out, whether or not you're going to assault cannon, where should you go next? Blue is easy because you can get something like gravity drive or like to actually push through to what you need. Dark energy tech could be helpful in certain situations, especially if you're using a non-draft type playing area. But blue is really just everybody's fallback. Blue is absolutely beautiful for actually getting different types of objectives. You can go for gravity drive if you need something positioning wise, if you need to do fleet logistics for some kind of game-winning play, especially with your hero. Fleet logistics pairs with that hero beautifully. Being able to lock it down on the game board and then move in is kind of like a Mahakt hero on yourself. That's the way I think of their hero, for a little bit of hint towards what we're going to talk about later. But you could also do yellow with them. Now, they're not as great with yellow because doing something like Sarween tools is not as helpful. They're building large amounts of ships all at once. so getting that constant discount isn't as great. But the L4 disruptors is nice if you're going towards somebody like the Xja, like things with a lot of that planetary shield there. Now, although yellow is pretty self-explanatory as terms of raw value, something weird I did want to point out before moving on. Predictive intelligence allows you to redistribute your command tokens at the end of each of your turns. This could actually be great, because if you're constantly waging wars with them, doing battles, and losing a lot of your ships, being able to then redistribute your command tokens, especially with their Armada ability of having 2 more than whatever is in your fleet pool, could definitely help with their command counter economy. However, you're actually spending money to research this instead of just spending influence to get more command tokens. So redistributing it at the end of each round might be sufficient enough, but if you see yourself doing a lot of different battles in different places, having that ability to switch it all around mid-round could be a really big help for them. This isn't diminishing returns because I actually think it's more helpful towards the end. Reducing your fleet size down to 2 by getting all your command tokens out of there can really help you stall out the game if necessary. If you get a secret objective such as Prove Endurance or something like that, you can definitely use this technology to secretly get it, even if you have an Asarl type in your game. The only faction tree I think they could completely go without is green. If you see your game-winning scenario utilizing an action card or something, you could try, but I don't suggest that. Just go ahead and go blue or yellow, depending on whether you need positioning or spending objectives. Next up, I love to talk about what strategy cards they like, especially early on. Having that strategy card for round 1 or 2 really sets up a faction for what they really enjoy. Now, you're going to want to go for warfare right away. That's the initial instinct with playing the Barony of Letnev there. Warfare, however, is actually not that helpful round 1, because what you're going to want to be using with it is a lot of your resources round 1 to build up your fleet. You don't need warfare primary to do that. You can use warfare secondary. Warfare secondary lets you build at your home system and then move out. What would you be doing anyway? I think building at your home system and moving out. So keep that for something else round 1, namely leadership, politics, or imperial. Getting imperial is great because they don't have any positioning abilities, so knowing early on where you have to be is much better for them. Getting politics to get a couple of action cards for some more flexibility, like I was saying, as well as getting the speaker token for what you need the next round is great, or fixing their command counter problem early on with leadership is going to be super helpful for them. Just stocking up early and having that flexibility is fantastic with the Barony of Letnev. If you can win fights, you need to be able to know where those fights are and get there in time. Diplomacy might be helpful later on if you make a ton of enemies with them, but you don't need to make enemies considering their promissory note and alliance are so sellable. One note about the strategy cards is I don't think you really have to grab technology early on. Yes, boosting towards it and forgetting about it could be helpful if you're one of the later picks, but I don't really think non-Euclidean shielding and the L4 disruptors are that super helpful to get right away, as the fights will usually break out later on, so you can kind of wait to do technology and focus on other things to begin with, especially after you see the opening objectives. So their strategy here is winning wars, not just fighting, but winning. You're going to want to utilize your actual combat strength when it applies to an objective. If you need to spread it around across the game board or win somebody's home system, you are the faction to do that. But you need to do it really intelligently because you only have so many resources. You're not like the Cabal where you get half of your stuff back winning or losing. You have to make sure that you're going to win going into it. So getting your technology upgrades and then moving in is great. Keep in mind, however, that non-Euclidean shielding, which by the way is so hard to say, every time I say it I have to do another take, but non-Euclidean shielding does not help with direct hits. If you are playing against an Asarl player or a player who just has a ton of action cards in their hand at the moment, you're going to have to be really careful. And if you've got an Asarl, definitely make an alliance with them, give them the money they need to get information about that person's hand of action cards before going in. If they have a direct hit, which remember there's 4 of them, it doesn't really help. The trade goods that you get out of using Arc Secundus with the commander, Arc Secundus as well as Duranium armor, is really helpful, and you're going to want to really, really mine that out if you possibly can, if you know that the person doesn't have direct action cards. Direct hit is usually one that comes out of their hand right away, especially if you use their flagship. So if they don't use it, just mine it out of them. You actually don't want to win white fights too fast with them, so be careful about that, like I said. Selling their alliance early on can actually be super helpful against people with large fleets. This wouldn't go for somebody like Sardak Nor, who has a ton of small ships, but instead you would want to use it with things with sustained damage if they're using Argent Flight or whatever. The Barony of Letnev, just keep this in mind, is a super straightforward faction. I actually think it might be the most straightforward faction. It's different than something like the Federation of Sol because they are pigeonholed into one type of playstyle, but fighting is a huge part of this game. No, I know it's not a war game, it's not space risk, but warfare is a part of it, and you're going to want to utilize it with the best faction that you can. Yes, they have bad command counter economy, but being able to redistribute their command counters and fix that early on is great because they have that Armada ability. Finally, every video I like to talk about their hero in particular because it's such a game-winning ability usually. However, with them, be super careful with it. If you did my little strategy of fleet logistics early on, it's more helpful with them, especially if you have a warfare strategy card. You can really win the game with this. But you need to win with this because it does lock it down afterwards if you don't have a warfare card or a Nalu agent or whatever. But bringing all of your ships into one system to take control of it, especially if you've got them surrounded beforehand, can really freak somebody out. This is your Mechatol Rex winning ability. This is your taking somebody's home system to win ability. This is getting a secret objective win ability. But you're not going to use it every single game because locking down your entire fleet across the game board into one system, and then at the end of the round, this card goes away, so you do have to go down to your fleet size again. It's so risky. I wish they changed it a little bit so it might be a little less risky and you might see it more often, but that's okay. Having a card that's just really, really good in the right scenarios is okay sometimes. So before we cut this off, I would like to thank my patrons really quick, especially the Crash Course Professor Turtle Dude who's up on the screen. If you want to become a patron, go ahead and check out cardboardcrashcourse.com. That's where you can become a patron, check out the podcast, and all of the above. I love my patrons so much. I love all of you for watching. Thank you very, very much. If you think that I missed anything in this video, go ahead and leave that in a comment below. I like hearing all feedback of all types, all good and bad. Just let me know. Have a great rest of your day. Pax Magnifica, Bellum Gloriosum. See ya in the final faction guide.